That's absolutely not a dumb question, because I think that especially with the filibuster, the way we talk about the filibuster commonly, it refers to how the Senate needs 60 votes to pass any legislation. But what is a filibuster? Technically speaking, the filibuster is kind of what people might remember from like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. The filibuster is the act of blocking the vote. And if you want to go, people don't actually do this anymore, but going and standing from the Senate and talking and talking until there is no vote on a bill. So the common term for filibuster and what the technical definition is are a little bit different. The filibuster has not always been a part of how our government works. It was actually created kind of by accident in the 19th century by Vice President Aaron Burr, who suggested getting rid of a Senate rule to streamline the process. So what happened was the Senate decided to get rid of this rule, and then several decades later, people realized that they could actually halt a vote by just talking and talking and talking, because there was no rule to cut off debate on the bill. So that's when the filibuster started, and then in 1917, I believe, this is at the start of World War I, and Woodrow Wilson kind of pushed the Senate into creating this rule, the 60-vote rule as it is now, that creates this threshold where you can cut off debate in the Senate, but it is more difficult to do that than the 50-vote threshold required to pass a bill. The filibuster has become a hot button issue for a couple reasons. One is just the circumstances we find ourselves in Washington. As parties became more polarized, it was in the House, whoever has the majority can still pass a bill. In the Senate, you need 60 votes. And so that's really caused the Senate to grind to a halt in a lot of ways. And it caused the leaders of the Senate, whether it was McConnell or Schumer recently, to look for other routes to get bills passed. So people started scrutinizing the filibuster, saying, is this something we need? We saw Schumer several years ago decide that he was going to get rid of the filibuster, do kind of a circumvention of the rule when it comes to appointing people to an administration. And then more recently, we saw McConnell go, they call it the nuclear option, act similarly when it comes to confirming a Supreme Court justice. Such a hard question. So what do we see happening in the future? I think that Mitch McConnell has been really clear that he believes the filibuster should stay in place. Some people think that that's because the filibuster actually works better for McConnell than it does for Democrats, because there are some key things like tax breaks that you can pass in the Senate with just a majority vote. So there's, I think that there's kind of a theory in place that this actually is something that favors Republicans a little bit. I think that Republicans would say to that, well, all we want is to be able to keep this piece of Senate tradition in place, and something that presumably is in place to help the Senate function more as a bipartisan body than the House. So what will we see happen? I think it depends on who's in power. I think that Democrats have shown much more of a willingness to kind of test the filibuster, but really right now, I think a majority of members of Congress want to keep it. Until something really drastically changes in America, in our party system and the balance of power, we're going to see debate over the filibuster.